Hi, I'm Mark, and welcome to the weekly Outside Views report on the politics in Asia and Oceania. Almost all eyes are currently on the Russian war of aggression in Ukraine. Russia's invasion eclipses many other conflicts, but in terms of security policy, the Indo-Pacific has been increasingly becoming the focus of the great and superpowers for many years, because some of the sea routes in the region are considered to be the most important trade routes in the world. Whoever controls them also has some control over the global economy and thus a powerful lever of power. China and the USA are therefore fighting bitterly for dominance in the Indo-Pacific. There are mutual threats, and occasionally the warships of both sides come dangerously close. But escalation is not only in the air in the conflict over the island Republic of Taiwan, it could get even worse. A few years ago, China began targeting Australia with espionage, with military threats, and with an economic war. However, Chinese President Xi Jinping has a difficult time in the conflict with Australia. At first glance, China seems to be economically and militarily superior. But is that enough? A Chinese weakness in particular could be fatal to Xi in this conflict. In the struggle for supremacy in the Indo-Pacific, Australia is a thorn in the side of the Chinese leadership. It is true that out of 25 million Australians, more than 1 million have Chinese roots, which is why you might assume that the people are close. But Australia is not only democratic and therefore an enemy of the system, but it's also one of the closest allies of the USA in the region, alongside Japan and South Korea. In addition, Australia is a rich and emerging resource power that will gain geostrategic influence in the future. That's why China tried early on to bring Australia under its control, by first expanding economic relations with the country. As late as 2014, Xi Jinping spoke in the Australian Parliament, where he was seen as a beacon of hope. And China is still Australia's largest trading partner, but relations between the two countries have deteriorated notably since 2017. And the main reason for this was China simply went too far in influencing Australia. The crisis period began with a spy drama. The focus was on Chinese billionaire Wang Xiangmo and Australian MP Sam Dastyari. At the time, Dastyari was considered a young star in the Labour Party, and Xiangmo is a businessman with good contacts in the Chinese leadership. Dastyari had not only accepted donations from his Chinese benefactor, but also warned him about surveillance by Australian intelligence, a scandal that hit Australia in the middle of the 2017 election campaign. And it should not have been the last scandal. Chinese businessmen tried again and again to buy influence with money. Longtime Labour leader Bill Shorten also accepted the equivalent of $41,000 from a Chinese billionaire for a joint lunch. And nerves in Australia were on edge, and then Prime Minister Malcolm Turnbull even switched to Chinese during a campaign speech and called on the Australian people to stand up against unseemly foreign interference. Observers see all of this as showing that China's attempt to exert influence follows a clear strategy from Beijing. Billionaire Wang Xiangmo had good relations with the so-called United Front. This branch of the Communist Party has the mission of strengthening the party's influence among non-communists at home and abroad. Or to put it another way, Xi has revived the United Front in order to buy power abroad, including here in Europe. He has described it in the past as the party's magic weapon. Australia suddenly finds itself in a situation where by far its most important trading partner does not accept the country's political sovereignty. In addition, there is Chinese industrial espionage and hacking. Chinese companies are buying more and more land down under. But then came the turning point. After the 2017 election campaign, Australia began to fight back. The country excluded the Chinese company Huawei from the 5G expansion and publicly called on Beijing to respect human rights in Hong Kong and in dealing with the Uyghurs in the Chinese province of Xinjiang. In addition, the Australian government called for an investigation into China's responsibility for the outbreak of the corona pandemic in 2020, and that was a slap in the face for Beijing. Annoyed, the government in Beijing therefore launched an economic war against Australia. Sanctions, punitive tariffs, and import bans on many Australian goods should bring the government in Canberra to its knees. There were also Chinese cyber attacks, and the government in Beijing banned Chinese tourists from vacationing in Australia. The shock in some areas of the Australian economy was initially great, but it only lasted for a short time, and the sanctions had little effect. And some experts therefore say the Australian economy has survived the Chinese sanctions stronger and is now more broadly based. Richard McGregor, China expert at Australia's Lowy Institute, told German newspapers, with its trade restrictions, China has not achieved its main goal of imposing high costs on Australia's economy and thus changing national security policy. With the punitive tariffs, Xi Jinping has rather weakened his position of power in the region. At the same time, with the punitive measures, he unintentionally sent other countries a warning about what could happen if they don't make their economy more independent of the People's Republic. It now seems as if China has admitted economic defeat. Xi Jinping spoke to Australian Prime Minister Anthony Albanese in late 2022 after a long freeze in bilateral relations. Both countries have since tried to improve their relations, and China has lifted many of the sanctions. In a few months of 2023, trade between China and Australia even reached record levels again. And for Xi, this is an admission of his own defeat. Nevertheless, Australia remains suspicious, which is particularly evident in the military area. Australia is arming massively, and the government only announced military reforms in April. The army is to be re-equipped for the use of missile technology. Missiles with a significant longer range than before are planned, and in addition, Australia buys submarines from the United States. And Australia's fear of China is justified. After all, the People's Republic now has the largest navy in the world, and Beijing signed a security agreement with the Solomon Islands in 2022 to intimidate Australia. From there, the Chinese navy could block, monitor, and control Australian waters. Shipping lanes are the Achilles heel of Australia's economy, dependent on oil imports. So if China shut down sea lanes, it could cripple Australia's economy in a matter of weeks. But Australia has a decisive advantage. It has strong allies like the USA and Great Britain, while China's aggressive foreign policy in recent years has tended to cause great mistrust in the region. Xi has no alliance that strengthens China's foreign and security policy. He is increasingly isolated. And ultimately, Australia will benefit from this. The koala did not only manage to resist the dragon. As a regional power in the Western Alliance, the country is increasingly becoming a partner that is becoming increasingly important in geostrategic terms, mainly as a counterweight to China. So I can only say today, well done, Australia, and move on like this. And if you are interested in what's happening in another part of the world as well, the next video is right here in the end screen. I'll see you there. I'll be back.